Hello again. Welcome to session 4. Is this 4?
I don't know.
I think it is.
It is 4.
It is 4.
It's
Session 4 of our
Session four.
first Peter exploration. This one.
We're in chapter 3. It's the confusing thing. But
Yes, we're in session
4.
4, but we're in chapter 3, and we're going to be
That's
focusing,
right.
as Kyle Adelman did, we're going to be focusing on the first 7 verses of chapter 3. In these 7 verses, we have some really specific language directed at husbands and wives. Those of you who know me will not be surprised to know that I get excited when I see these passages because it gives me the ability or the opportunity to talk about marriage and biblical marriage. But before we get to that, Kyle Idleman, I always have a weird, it always comes out odd. Kyle Idleman made an interesting point before we get to the marriage stuff that I wanted to hit on for just a second. He talked about how the original readers of Peter's words, and really even in Ephesians, the original readers of Paul's words, these instructions for husbands and wives, for us, can seem a little routine, or we can blow past them as, okay, yeah, we're supposed to respect each other and honor each other. But to the people who heard these words initially, this was revolutionary.
Countercultural.
Incredibly countercultural. The idea, and this is something that really jumped out to me that I don't think Kyle Idleman pushed all that hard, but he referenced in kind of a broad way, is culturally speaking, Christianity at times in the culture we're living in now is represented as the opposite of what it really is and what it really was. Christianity was the driving force in a culture that didn't believe in these things for equality and for compassion and for kindness. You know, he did talk about the orphanages and the treatment of children.
Widows.
Christianity was planted the seeds for equality in a culture where equality was not even a consideration. It wasn't a part of the dialogue. It wasn't that it had been rejected. It wasn't even a part of the conversation. So I thought it was interesting to me because oftentimes I think our culture misrepresents Christianity as being the opposite of that. What do you think?
Oh, I don't have thoughts about this. No, you're absolutely right. I think sometimes you're right. We look at Christianity and we think, oh, this is the antiquated way of doing things. When at the time it was such a driving force of this is the way it was meant to be from the very beginning of the garden, and we've gotten so far away from it. And Christianity was this big, as you said, revolutionary push towards this is the way it should look, and not just for Christianity to grow in that time in such a countercultural way. It just blows my mind that Christianity just grew so rapidly. The church just kept going and going, and in a time where they represented such change in the status quo.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge for us today as well.
Well, so changing the status quo kind of leads us into our conversation about husbands and wives. And this passage starts off in the very first verse of chapter 3. Wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. That verse encompasses spousal influence on the part of the wife. That verse by itself is completely countercultural, because what does that verse imply? That verse implies that wives, by being the types of godly, Christ-centered wives that you're commanded to be, you will have influence over your husband. And again, that idea in and of itself, the fact that wives can influence husbands, would have been completely countercultural.
Countercultural and really, I feel like in a lot of ways would have incited a lot of conflict in that day.
Sure.
Why would a wife have influence over her husband? Although I think the wives really knew. I mean, we're the ones calling the shots.
Well, right, obviously. I mean, we're going to get to that.
If the husband's the head, then we're the neck, and we're turning the head wherever we want.
There's obviously, it's just two dudes talking about this, so
We
of
know
course
nothing.
that's where we're going to get. But no, the idea that wives are influencing husbands in this passage is really revolutionary. We don't want to miss how powerful that was. Extremely powerful, and how empowering that was for what women are and what they should be and can be in a marriage, in a culture that did not honor or respect any of those implications. So, Alan, we talked this morning, and verse 3 is where you had some thoughts. Do not let your adorning be external.
Yeah, and just for the sake of, I know we have teens that are certainly watching this, and not that this is important for teens. This is important for adults, men and women. Just the idea of we have such pressure, especially in the age of social media, that our beauty should be coming from our outward appearance, from the way that we look and from the things that we have. The hair treatments or skin treatments we're able to afford, all these sorts of, visible status givers. And it's really hard to put on Facebook or on Instagram how patient you are or how generous you are. People will certainly try to do that.
They do.
But really, when it comes to the issues of the heart and the beauty that comes from having these kind of virtues, where our beauty should come from, our internal selves, or the inner self, that is just something that is so important. And we get so wrapped up in, am I getting enough likes? Am I getting the right filter? And am I portraying myself in the most beautiful way possible? And if not, I'm going to delete that picture, take down that post. When really the beauty that we should be looking for comes from within ourselves. It should come from this pursuit of a holy life, which is the theme of Peter, living the First Peter, this living this holy life and loving others. And not trying to make a show of it by posting it.
Right.
That is just not where our value comes from. That's not where our beauty should come from.
I so badly want everything that you just said to be a teenage problem. I really do.
Yeah.
I want it as adults. I want to say, kids, when you get to the adult
We
stage,
don't have this
none of
problem.
that matters. It's all we're all mature, and none of that doesn't affect any of us.
It absolutely does.
A cursory view of Facebook proves that to be true for all age groups. That's all. I'm going to leave it there. I was about to. I had an example. I was about to, but I'm not. I'm not. I'm just going to say, well said. Applicable to teens. Applicable to everyone. All right. Well, we want to end this conversation by looking at, and again, this is a marriage-based passage. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that we just talked about that's not necessarily marriage-based. But for me, the marriage counselor, I see the husband and wife stuff, and I want to make sure that there's some things that we mentioned. Number one, I thought Kyle. I'm just going to call him Kyle. I think Kyle did a good job. Is that too formal?
It's his name. So.
It is his name. I thought he did a good job of
Mr. Kyle.
Mr. Kyle. He did a good job of pointing out something that is fundamental to a sound marriage, and that is that the behavior, the obedience. We're gonna keep this thing in the spiritual realm. Obedience to God's commands for us as husbands and wives should not be contingent upon your husband or wife reciprocating. I'm gonna slow that down.
Yeah.
Let's back that up and let's do a slow-mo replay of what I just said. If you understand your calling as a husband and you are willing to engage with that calling, so long as your wife understands her calling as well, you're getting it wrong. If you are a wife and you are willing to engage in your calling as a wife in the way that God has asked you to engage in that calling, so long as your husband is following his as well, you're doing it wrong. The idea that your obedience to God is contingent upon your spouse is signs that your marriage is about you, and it's about you being happy in this moment right now, and that is just a very flimsy foundation for a marriage.
Yeah, a temporal goal, a goal of happiness above, the goal of holiness. That our marriages are actually built to make us holier people, more complete people.
Yes, and in that comes happiness, comes fulfillment.
Absolutely.
But if that's the goal, and this is the way I've always tried to phrase this to husbands and wives, and it's hard to do it in a short period of time. It's hard to do in a long period of time. But the idea that happiness and fulfillment, rattle off the words that you want out of a marriage. Those are the offshoots of a marriage that's doing the right things. They're not the goals. They're not the things you're shooting for. They're the benefits and the blessings that come from a godly, functional, biblical marriage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does.
Thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking about people who are either in marriages or have yet to be in a marriage, and it's so important to have this principle clearly in view, that as you pursue your spouse and as you build that marriage, as you nurture it, it should not be contingent on how did that person treat me today. Now, Kyle Adam, he goes into a great sort of offshoot of, if we're talking about abuse, that is a different category.
Absolutely.
That is something where
God did not command you stay in an abusive marriage.
No,
That's right.
absolutely not. But if it's, she wasn't as patient with me as I think she should have been, therefore I'm going to withhold the respect that I am to give her as commanded by Scripture, that is absolutely the wrong way of looking at marriage. As you said, that is a perfect point.
Yeah. Okay. So we're looking at the time. We want to wrap this conversation up just a bit. The last verse is where we'll end.
Yes,
it. Likewise,
verse 7, yep.
Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, obviously, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. I thought Kyle did a good job of referencing the prayers not being hindered and it being a spiritual pursuit.
But he did not address the weaker vessel.
He did not. I was surprised by that.
Which
Alan and I talked about that this
We
morning.
wanted to address, right?
That he didn't address the weaker vessel. So. Do you want to address it?
Well, we were both talking about this and
We
how
were.
just hearing that could trigger a lot of people to be like, oh, they're talking about women as the weaker sex, that we're going back to inequality. And that is not at all what Peter is going towards. When we looked up the Greek
We
word,
went to the Greek.
which was, do you remember?
Asthenes.
Asthenes, which
Asthenes.
is very much when it's talking about the weaker vessel, that vessel word, asthenes, is
Asthenes?
asthenes.
It may have been Asthenes. I don't know.
I
Ask
try-
Jason.
he'll know.
Or I
Jason-
can let my guy pronounce. My very sleepy Greek guy can pronounce it again.
They don't understand that reference. Anyways, this word was in reference to the physical body. Very much it's saying women in general are weaker physically than men. That is not to say that that is a higher value to men or a lower value to women. That is not at all what he's saying here. In fact, he's putting more responsibilities on the man and saying,
Absolutely.
hey, you big dumb idiot, make sure that you are protective, make sure that you value your wife for who she is, and remember that she's weaker than you, so you should be the protector. I don't know where I'm going with this.
No,
but
I think you're right. That's fair.
exactly what he's saying. You are the protector. You are the person who is stronger. Therefore, you will use that strength to respect and value your wife.
Absolutely. All right. I think you did a good job of summarizing that. I'm not going to add to it. I am just going to say this. I've thought a lot today as we've been talking about what we were going to talk about today. I've thought a lot today about we did a marriage workshop, and we were going to do in 2020. We had a marriage retreat scheduled that, along with everything else in the culture, got tossed out. We also had some other marriage-specific content. We had started the Family Life class, which was focusing on marriage. All of that is because to really dive into a deeper calling to marriage and to dive into a biblical marriage takes a long time. So how do I express in 10 minutes, and we're already like 2 minutes over, but how do I express in 10 minutes from a marriage counselor, marriage therapy perspective, using this biblical framework for what a marriage is supposed to look like? How do we get to a happier, stronger, healthier marriage? And the best I could come up with is this. If you can, as a husband, know what your role is, your biblical role as a husband. As a wife, know what your biblical role as a wife is, and then do everything in your power to be that. You would be amazed at how much happens, how much growth, how fast the growth happens when two people in a marriage make that commitment together, where they decide to stop digging into each other's problems. They stop looking at all the ways in which their spouse isn't aligning with their biblical behavior, or a husband isn't aligning with his biblical behavior. When we take the focus off of that, and we just, husbands, find out, read, and this is a great passage to start. What is your responsibility as a husband? Wife, what is your responsibility as a wife? And then dig into that. When one person does it, the marriage improves, because you start to see this flow of health that you don't see otherwise. When two people do it, it's marriage altering. So my encouragement to all of you married people, or all of you people who are considering marriage and one day will be married, know your job, do your job as best as you can, regardless of whether your spouse joins you in that, although I pray that they do. Anything to add?
I don't think so. This has been a great study on wives and husbands and their roles. Any other suggestions for them, other scriptures to go to in the pursuit of this study?
Ephesians 5 is a great place to look, but actually, and we'll put some digital stuff out at some point, but there's verses, the verse in Titus about women loving their husbands is interesting just because of the type of love it describes. But I would start with Ephesians 5 if you're looking to get a better understanding of your job. And keep in mind, when you look at Ephesians 5, men, that verse has been used a lot to put men in a position that I don't think it implies that they're supposed to be in. Men, you have the harder job, according to Ephesians 5, because you're supposed to love your wife sacrificially. We want to love her, but sacrificially is a hard thing to do. So Ephesians 5 is a great place to start.
Very good.
All right, thanks for being with us, and we'll see you again soon.
Be sure to answer the questions below.
Yes, not below, you hit next.
Next on the next page.
Next.
Well, if you're on the PC, it's below, right?
Answer the
Then
questions.
The next page.
Answer the questions.
Please answer the questions. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.